On a recent podcast interview, Habs insider Stu Cowan spoke about his thoughts about whether Laine would join the Montreal Canadiens, and well, there were some very interesting discussions we had to get into. Plus, Christian Dvorak trade talks are stemming up, and there's a lot of controversy between Habs communities, left side and the right side of this whole thing, and Kent Hughes might just have to make a decision sooner rather than later. We're going to get into all these topics coming up on this episode of Habs Digest, and we're going to start with Christian Dvorak, and I'm seeing a bit of controversy, Jesse, whether it's on Reddit or Twitter or even Facebook or even between different news outlets talking about whether the Habs should or should not trade Christian Dvorak. And well, we're just going to get into this now. This kind of all started today when I read an article from Ryan Sporer at the Hockey Writers, as always, linked down below. So he was basically saying that there should be a greater urgency to move a player like Dvorak, who so clearly doesn't figure into the team's future plans at this point, especially with Waugh projected to make the roster. Goes on to say, consider it the conundrum Hughes faces for 2024-25, since Newhook has stepped in for the injured Dach. He gets enter his own line. There won't be room for Newhook down the middle if you still have Dvorak there and Dach comes back from injury. But then C. Brown from Dose.ca, also linked down below this article, he said, in any case, I don't really see how trading Dvorak would really help the Habs open up a spot for Waugh, who's a winger, and considering that Dvorak probably isn't a player in high demand, you think the Kent might have to pay to get rid of a guy that isn't really a problem and will be a free agent at the end of the season. There's a lot of talk going around about Christian Dvorak, Jesse, and Kent Hughes got a lot of decisions to make. What do you think on this front? Like, I get the argument on one side that it opens up a roster spot, whether it's for Waugh or even a Beck, but on the other side, it's like, if you have to pay something to get rid of this contract, which you might have to do, I'm just not for that, and I don't think Kent is either.
Kent is all about good asset management, right? And not making those emotional decisions, but really those cerebral, right, long-term kind of decisions that we know Kent is becoming infamous for already in his short time in Montreal. He's done such great work with Slafkovsky, Guhle, those contracts, Barron, Xhekaj, the list goes on, right? And you have to feel like he wants to keep that going. He wants to get the best out of his players that he can. But we've seen in the past, Kent has shown, even last year, trading Mike Hoffman, right? The propensity to make a deal if it's going to open up a spot for a younger player. Like last year was kind of maybe giving Jesse alone in a little bit of a bigger spot, even though he wasn't able to take it. You have to feel if you got somebody like a Beck, you know, or even obviously like a Joshua Waugh, it's like that's even more reason. Those are players you have even more faith in. So it's kind of that motivation, right? But it's like, you know, for right now with the Habs, it's like taking that next step. It almost really involves like taking ownership of what's really on the ice, you know, and really allowing to really put your fingerprints of having all hands on deck really for this team. So for me, I feel like this is a move, especially with the cap space going up, where it makes it a little bit easier now to make this deal happen. So I say making this move, even if you're not getting this immense reward, just because we have so many young players. We have, you know, players like Alex Newhook that we know can play the center as well. I don't know. What do you think about this, Josh? Do you think that we should wait a little bit more for obviously like Christian Dvorak to raise his value? You have to feel like Kent is probably a little bit more inclined. It's probably the smarter long-term play, but there's a solid argument to be made about making space for those young guys as well.
Here's my thought about it. Like, if we take a look at Dvorak's stats, it doesn't paint a pretty picture. I mean, this guy, if you look at his Corsi for percentage, I think that's the worst we've seen on any graphic of any player we've used. Again, it was a very shortened season with only 30 games, 9 points in those 30 games. A sub 40% Corsi for is not good. He had a down season defensively. His faceoffs were, I still believe, the best on the team, maybe other than Monahan for the time he was there. Could be wrong. My line is drawn, Jesse, if Montreal has to pay to get rid of him. Because, as Ryan Sporer points out in his thing, like, look, as even like we say, like, he's not that big a problem. Or sorry, this was the Dose article. I think he's not that big a problem. He can still win you faceoffs. Is he worth his cap hit? No, I mean, not even close. Is he worth like $2 million? Yeah, I would say so. He's a good face-off guy. He can fit into a bunch of different situations, play decently with a bunch of different line mates. He's not amazing, but he's still a bottom 6 NHL center. And then it gets to the cap hit. No, he's not worth the cap hit. But who cares if you're Montreal? Because you're under the cap and you have so much space. The only reason I would say, like, to get rid of him, even if you have to pay for him, is if you really look at training camp and you're like, holy crap, Owen Beck was so good. Like, I genuinely see him as a player on this roster. And if Joshua Waugh, like, I think he's already guaranteed a spot. I don't think you need to make room for him. I don't think Guhle is going to make the lineup. And we know RV Pinard is out for the early part of the season. So, to me, Waugh is a shoo-in anyway. I think for me, the only reason you'd rush to make this kind of trade is one, if you get a good offer. Like you said, if you can make it happen, make it happen. I mean, look, if a decent offer comes up, I'd say he's gone tomorrow. but I don't think teams are going to be willing to offer him much, because even though he's not that big a problem for Montreal, Jesse, the problem is having to fit him with another team at that cap hit, and I think that's where we hit a snag.
That's it. I know as Habs fans, we're so eager. We want to take that next step. We wanted to see major kind of changes, right? But sometimes kind of holding on to a player, make sure we're getting good value back is sometimes the better play. Again, we have a little bit of time to be patient here. I know we're starting to get anxious. We want to kind of turn that corner. You could argue that getting rid of a player that maybe just hasn't been able to really live up to his potential and really kind of free up some space, just kind of, creates a culture of accountability as well in the locker room. Again, we have a little bit of time. It's going to be interesting to see, but as we know, Kent's got a lot of business done, so he's going to have some time to wheel and deal here, and you have to feel like that's going to be on its way.
It's going to be fun. Who knows? Maybe he's on vacation now that it's August and all this stuff before August came around, but I know he's got something stirring probably before the start of the season, so we'll just have to wait and see. But, speaking of moves, Jesse, this is something we've talked about a lot, but Stu Cowan, of course, amazing writer for the Montreal Gazette, does much more than that, but he was recently on an episode of the Sick podcast kind of talking about this whole Laine situation. It's always interesting to get people who are a bit more well-connected, their insights into this whole situation. I'm going to bring up a few quotes that he had to say, because I think you guys are going to find this interesting as well. He said, talking about Montreal, I think they have interest in any forward that can score. But like we talked about in the previous podcast, I think there are some red flags with Laine, just like there were some red flags with Pierre-Luc Dubois. He goes on to say the thing about Kent Hughes, he has so many contacts around the league, players he was an agent for that would have played with Laine, coaches. He will do his homework. If they are thinking about signing Patrik Laine, there will be a lot of homework done. And he ends off with giving his opinion. He said, is there a possibility of him coming here? Yeah, because they need forwards who can score. And Patrik Laine can score, but I don't know if he can fit into the chemistry in this room. Is it possible? Yes. But personally, I think it's unlikely. And Jesse, I think that we're kind of roughly in agreement on this whole thing. Like, Kent, if he does the homework and they find that there's nothing really wrong with team chemistry-wise or personality-wise that they can really see or nothing super serious, this deal is going to get done. I think Montreal's willing to give up what Columbus is going to be asking for Laine, because they also went on to talk about the value of Laine. It's extremely hard to predict. I think the value of Laine is really going to be dictated between how many teams are actually vying to get him. Because if you have 6 teams trying to go get him, some are asking for retention, some are not asking for retention, some can fit him in under the cap like Montreal, some can't. I think that'll really change the value around. But I don't think he's going to cost that much. And I think Stu is on the same page as a lot of us. Like, hey, if they find that nothing is really wrong, you gotta do this at this point.
It does, right? But he feels like there's a low chance of this happening.
Yeah.
I know many people I feel that there's a higher chance than most others, do of this really happening. Absolutely. I would put this at a 40% chance of this trade happening. It's not quite a coin flip, but it's pretty close, right? Because you got a lot of things going for Montreal. It's like Kent is way ahead of schedule. He's taking care of so much business. He's got the cap space. He said that he wants his team to take a big step up. There's a spot for him in that top 6. We got a short-term deal. Like, what he could really do to help this team kind of elevate, just bring that excitement that I think a lot of these fans really deserve, being able to light up the lamp, have that dynamic player, right? Like, we almost feel like we're getting spoiled, right? Where we start to get all the offensive players starting to come at us as once with Demidov and Laine. And you know what? We deserve that as Habs fans. I know that there's a lot of red flags and everything else. And again, it's a great point by Stu and it's almost kind of reassuring knowing that if Kent does make this move, he's going to have the connection. So we should feel rest assured that if this does happen, we should feel really good about this. But for me, it's like, we've heard for days now, even going like a week now, where it's like Montreal is probably the most serious contender for Patrik Laine. And you have to feel like any deal is kind of centered around the excess of D-men. For me, it kind of works out because we have so many of these prospects where it's like, you actually need to do a trade where a free agency isn't always the best when you got so many assets that you kind of need to do something with and you don't quite have all the space for it, right? So I feel like there could be a huge chance of this coming, but we're going to have to see. I think what it'll really rely on is just getting his word, from around the league in terms of the culture, right? And, Kent is really going to make the decision, based off of that.
Here's the thing. Like, I mean, a trade I think is going to get done before the end of the summer. I think as Habs fans, sometimes, like, this might not be what people want to hear. Maybe some of you are still very anti-Laine. But I think that, as much as it makes sense for Montreal, there are some other teams that I think it makes sense for. And one team that keeps coming into mind is Anaheim. Like, they're in a very similar position to Montreal. They have a ton of talent. They're ready to go. John Gibson's on his, last legs here now. But eventually, it is what it is. But, there are teams that fit other than Montreal. It's just the fact that Montreal probably has some of the most to give up in terms of what Columbus would want. So that's why we keep linking it to. And there's, it's getting serious when, like, every account under the sun on Twitter is posting their own takes, like, trying to be the first to break the news just so they can go back weeks later. And there was that one thing where they posted Laine spotted in the Montreal airport, and I'm like 99% sure that was in the Winnipeg airport. Like, I'm pretty sure it was just someone faking it. And I actually think Stu, I don't know, couldn't tell if he was being sarcastic or not. If it was sarcasm, it was really dry, and it was hilarious either way. They talked about it on the show, but it's getting more serious every single day. And you got to think Columbus is feeling that pressure to move him before the season starts, Jesse. And the longer they hold out, well, you know what? I don't think his value is going to really go down. If he stays with the team and he's forced to play, I guess it can only really go up if he manages to stay on the ice. The only way it goes down is if he gets an injury. There's a lot of stuff we could talk about, but I want to hear your thoughts. What do you think about Stu Cowan's comments? He says he thinks it's unlikely. I know, Jesse, you say it's probably more likely. I'm probably in the middle. I'm like, I think a trade happens, probably 90% chance, whether it's with Montreal. I'm probably sitting at a solid 15 to 20%, which is fairly low, but I mean, I think there's a lot of other teams that would be in the race as well. But let us know what you think down below, because this is a really interesting topic. That'll do it for this episode of Habs Digest. If you enjoyed, leave a like, comment, subscribe to the channel. Thank you all for tuning in every single day, even during this time of the year where there's not that much to talk about. I'm Josh Gosse, my co-host, Jesse Poirier. We'll catch you in the next one.